Don't you do it, don't you dare, just don't, I can't even, please don't work with me here. False football gods, please. If you've never muttered scream something along these lines when you were next up in a fantasy draft and hoping for a certain player, well, you're not doing it right. Fantasy football drafts are all about collecting the best possible value throughout the draft, but let's not pretend there aren't those players we badly want on our squads. Whether it's a player on our favorite team, a sleeper no one has caught on to yet, or this year's big breakout performer, these players add an extra level of excitement to the roster construction process. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Last year, I nailed this thing. Lamar Miller, Mark Ingram, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, Drew Brees, Devonta Freeman, John Brown, Eric Deckard, Philip Rivers, Zach Ertz, Diane Lewis, Richard Rodgers, Jeremy Langford, Bishop Sankey. Okay, they can't all be winners. That's going to be a tough, impossible act to follow, but I'll do my best. The below round-by-round analysis will give you an idea of what's going through my head on draft day. I have my rankings. I have my projections. I've set up tiers. And I certainly have a few of my favorite targets circled and in the queue. Round 1 target, Antonio Brown. I know. Who doesn't want the best player in fantasy? The reason I list Brown here is because there's a healthy debate out there as to the best position to draft from. My preference is as early as possible. If I can get my hands on Brown, I know I have one spot in my lineup filled with a player who owns both an elite floor and elite ceiling. Incredibly, Brown has finished just under half of his games as a top 10 fantasy wideout over the past 2 seasons. I'd also be content with Julio Jones or Odell Beckham Jr. early in the first round, but I'm not overly fond of a late first round pick, simply because there is a massive tier of players of similar value. Picking early allows you to grab an elite player and then pick up 2 of the remaining available standouts at the 2nd/3rd round turn. More people play on ESPN than anywhere else. Join or create the league in the #1 fantasy football game. Sign up for free. Round 2 target, Mark Ingram. I list Ingram here because I think he's very undervalued and can actually be had in the 3rd round of many 10 and 12 team drafts. Of course, as mentioned earlier, there's a hefty tier of similar talent that runs from the late stages of the 1st round through the middle of the 3rd round. That said, you'll have plenty of options no matter where you are in the order. Take the best player available, regardless of whether it's a running back, wide receiver or Rob Gronkowski. As for Ingram, he racked up 216 touches and 1,174 yards in only 12 games last season. Thanks to a massive role as a receiver, Ingram provided one of the highest floors in fantasy. He finished every week he was active as a top 30 fantasy back. Ingram's shaky durability, he has missed 3 or more games in 4 of his 5 seasons, is a slight concern, but he also leads the NFL in carries within 3 yards of the goal line during the past 2 years. Ingram's high-end week-to-week production makes him a fine 2nd round target, and an absolute bargain in the 3rd. Round 3 targets, Sammy Watkins or LeSean McCoy. These won't be the first Buffalo Bills you read about today. Watkins and McCoy are both undervalued this year, primarily as a byproduct of injury-plagued 2015 campaigns. Watkins missed 3 games and a chunk of 2 others. During the 11 games he played in full, he posted 960 yards and 8 touchdowns, which allowed him the 6th most fantasy points at the position. McCoy also played 11 full games and posted 1,150 yards and 5 touchdowns on 224 touches. He was fantasy's #3 scoring back during those weeks. Prior to a Week 15 injury, McCoy's worst fantasy week was a 26th place finish in Week 1. If you come out of the 3rd round of your draft with one of these Bills, you're sitting pretty. Alshon Jeffrey and Mike Evans are both falling to the 3rd, as well, and are solid alternatives. Round 4 target, Carlos Hyde. There are a lot of reasons to not like Hyde this season, and I certainly understand them. His team has a very rough schedule. He has missed 11 games due to injury over the past 2 seasons, and Chip Kelly's offense progressively flamed out during his time in Philadelphia. But too often we get caught up in the negatives and forget about the positives. Above all else, Hyde is really good at football. Since entering the league in 2014, He's averaging 2.27 yards after contact per attempt, which trails only Marshawn Lynch and Legarrette Blount for tops at the position minimum 150 attempts. Per Pro Football Focus, he forced 32 forced missed tackles on 115 attempts last season, which was the league's best rate among backs with more than 50 carries. Also, Hyde was at the disadvantage of facing the base defense 88% of the time last season, whereas Kelly's fast-paced offense saw base at only a 42% clip. Hyde is a candidate for 250-plus carries, and is a sneaky bet for 40 receptions. How many impact seasons does Eric Deckard have to have before he starts getting some ADP love? EPA/Peter Foley Round 5 target. Eric Deckard has finished 3 of the past 4 seasons as a top 10 fantasy receiver. Providing his owners with an incredibly high floor, Deckard was the only receiver to post the top 30 fantasy week in each of his appearances last season. He handled 1/4 of the Jets' targets, when active, and paced the NFL with 30 targets while within 5 yards of the end zone. What's not to like? Maybe Deckard's limited ceiling. He posted just 1 top 10 fantasy week last season, but otherwise, not much. Deckard is a borderline WR1 who you can snatch up in the 5th round. Don't pass him up. Round 6 target. Don't Moncrief and Drew Lock played 7 full games last season. During those weeks, Moncrief caught 32 passes for 351 yards and 5 touchdowns. He enjoyed the 19% target share, and sat 22nd at the position in fantasy points in those weeks. During the weeks Luck was out, Moncrief caught 32 passes for 382 yards and 1 score. Moncrief was considered a very raw prospect when the Colts selected him in the 3rd round of the 2014 draft. Now 23 years old and entering his first season as the team's clear-cut number 2 receiver, Moncrief is an obvious breakout candidate. His 6'2", 222-pound frame and 4.4 40-yard dash wheels provide you with the upside you want from your early round picks. The middle rounds round 6/7 target. Coby Fleener, Gronkowski and Jordan Reed aside, Fleener might have the highest ceiling of any tight end this season. But unlike Gronkowski and Reed, Fleener won't cost you an early round pick. Jimmy Graham averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game during his years as the starter in New Orleans. His production dipped to 6.6 per game in Seattle last year. Benjamin Watson averaged 4.2 FPPG during over a 10-year period before leaping to 7.3 with the Saints last year. Fleener averaged 5.3 FPPG in Indianapolis and is in line for a generous target share in New Orleans after signing a 5-year, $36 million contract during the off-season. There's always risk when a player changes teams, but with Brees under center in the Saints' high-volume offense, Fleener appears in line for a career year. All things considered, he's my ideal starter at tight end this season. Round 7 target. Danny Woodhead or maybe Melvin Gordon. If Woodhead is on the board in the 7th round, you'll have a hard time getting me to take someone else. The heavily used scat back has played 2 full seasons over the past 3 seasons. He was Fantasy's number 19 scoring back in 2013, and finished 11th last year. And that's just in non-PPR leagues. He's certainly going to go a bit earlier, but Woodhead might end up being my most owned player in PPR leagues this year. He finished 12th in PPR fantasy points in 2013 and was 3rd last year. Primed for the same role he played last season, which included 182 touches and plenty of work near the goal line, Woodhead is a value as early as the 4th round of PPR leagues. I also mention Gordon here because he's an intriguing post-high sleeper, but may still be limited by an offense that scores most of its touchdowns through the air and uses Woodhead as its primary goal line back. As noted in a recent article, however, players who struggled badly in the touchdown department on a big sample of work tend to rebound in a big way the next season. Gordon is especially worth a look here if you're weak at the position and need to take a shot at a high upside player in the middle rounds. Round 7 target. Eli Manning. If you play in a standard/casual league at ESPN, there's a good chance quarterbacks will come off the board earlier than at other sites. For example, Cam Newton and Aaron Rodgers are currently being drafted in the 2nd round. I certainly don't advise going that direction, which is why Manning is the first quarterback I've recommended. However, with more advanced players waiting longer than ever, there are values to be had. I pounced on Newton in the 5th round a few times, and I recently took Luck as late as the 7th. That's not going to happen in most leagues, but the message here is to watch for values throughout your draft. If your tiers at other positions dry up, don't be afraid to pounce on a value at quarterback. As for Manning specifically, he has posted 4 top 10 fantasy seasons during his 12-year career. That's not good, but consider that 2 of the 4 have come during Ben Mikado's 2 seasons running the offense. Manning is one of the better talents at the position and will benefit from newcomer Sterling Shepard. More on him shortly, and possibly Victor Cruz, and of course, there's that guy Odell Beckham Jr. who is going in the 1st round. Manning's ceiling is sky high in his 3rd year in Mikado's offense, and he will be available as late as the 10th round in competitive leagues. Round 8 target, Garrett Barnidge. I've noticed that there are values at the tight end position throughout drafts this year. It's hard to pass on Reed when he falls to the 4th round, but when you do, you often end up sitting there staring at the likes of Fleener, Delaney Walker and Tyler Eifert several rounds later. And if you pounce on one of them, suddenly the other positions are drying up and Barnidge sticks out like a sore thumb in the 8th or 9th round. I don't generally recommend taking 2 tight ends, especially in the first half of your draft, but if you wait at the spot, Barnidge is a terrific target. Despite dealing with some horrible quarterback play last season, the veteran broke out to the tune of 79 receptions, 1,043 yards and 9 touchdowns. Only Gronkowski scored more fantasy points. Yes, the quarterback position is a problem, and the likes of Corey Coleman and Josh Gordon may chip away at his targets, but Barnidge will remain the mainstay in Cleveland's offensive attack. Zach Ertz, Antonio Gates, and, if you're aiming for a high-ceiling breakout player, Landry Green are also strong targets in rounds 8 through 10. Round 8 target, Kevin White. White is a raw prospect with 1 productive collegiate season on his resume, and he missed his entire rookie campaign due to a shin injury. Okay, so there's obviously risk here. But there are so many reasons to be optimistic. For starters, White was the 7th overall pick in the 2015 draft for a reason. He's a freak athlete, standing 6'3", 215 pounds, and ran a sub-4 40-yard dash. With Eddie Royal, Deont Thompson and Joshua Bellamy his primary competition for snaps, White is guaranteed a near every down role. And Jay Cutler loves force-feeding his top targets the ball near the goal line. Consider that only Ben Roethlisberger 136 has thrown more passes into the confines of the end zone than Cutler 131 over the past 3 seasons. Only Rodgers 196 has more over the past 2 years. Brandon Marshall 44 with Chicago and Jeffrey 53 pace all active players in end zone targets in the past 3 years. Yes, White is unproven and will play second fiddle to Jeffrey in a run-first offense. But the combination of his athletic profile, opportunity and A-plus touchdown upside makes him well worth the mid-round pick. Round 9 target, Sterling Shepard. Shepard is my top-ranked rookie wide receiver. He's a bit more expensive in PPR formats, but is a very good value in the 9th or 10th round of 10 and 12-team leagues. The moment he was drafted, it was extremely apparent that he would immediately step in as an every-down player. The Giants had a third wideout on the field on 91% of their pass plays last season, and have ranked second in the category during each of Mikado's 2 seasons. Shepard is a good bet for 70 receptions and is a sleeper to reach 90 as the team's primary possession receiver. The Manning-Shepard battery is one of my favorite ways to round out my starting lineup, but Shepard is going late enough in ESPN leagues that he could easily be your 5th receiver. Shepard is my guy here, but Marvin Jones is also an extremely nice value in the 9th round. 10 target, Willie Snead. This time last year, Brandon Coleman was soaking up a ton of hype and Snead was a relative unknown. It took only until week 2 for the 2014 undrafted free agent to take over as the Saints' number 2 receiver. Despite missing the game and scoring only 3 touchdowns, Snead powered his way to a 36th place finish at the position, with 69 catches and 984 yards. Snead is now the team's clear-cut starter opposite Brandon Cooks, and, considering he's only 23 years old, we likely haven't seen his best work. Yes, rookie Michael Thomas and the aforementioned Fleener are in the mix, but they don't figure to see many more targets than Marks Colston and Watson did last season. Snead is a terrific receiver, good blocker and in a great situation. Snatch him up in the 10th round of 12-team drafts, and as late as the 12th in 10-teamers. If Snead is gone, a now healthy Vincent Jackson is a strong alternative. Round 11 target, Tyrod Taylor. Taylor was a relative unknown prior to last season, his first as a starter, which helps explain why he's being undervalued this year despite producing at such a high level. Taylor averaged 18.4 fantasy points per game, 9th highest in the league, and finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback in half of his appearances, 6th highest. Taylor sports a high floor as a result of his rushing ability. Only Newton had more rushing yards among quarterbacks last year and produces a lot of splash plays thanks to a propensity for throwing the deep ball. Taylor is a fringe starter in 10 and 12-team leagues, and you can get him in the double-digit rounds. The late round Flyers round 12 target, Bilal Powell. When the Jets signed Matt Forte to a 3-year, $12 million contract during the offseason, the thought was that he'd be the team's clear starter at running back. However, the very next day, the team re-signed Powell to a 3-year, $11.25 million deal. If that isn't enough of an indication that New York values the two players similarly, consider how heavily Powell was used last season. During the 9 games he played in full, Powell averaged 7.3 carries and a massive 6.8 targets per game. He sat 10th at the position in fantasy points during the span, 5th in PPR. Forte might get the starts, but this is a two-headed backfield. Also, during his 8 seasons with the Bears, Forte was on the field for 2,522 snaps, which easily leads the position during the span. If the veteran takes a step back, Powell could easily take control of the Jets' backfield. He's a steal in the late rounds. Aforementioned Saints rookie Thomas sports WR2 upside and is also available in the 12th round 13 target. Devin Funchess was on the field for only 37% of the Panthers' snaps as a rookie, but he certainly made an impact when called upon down the stretch. Funchess caught his first career touchdown in Week 9 and, despite accruing only 42 targets, was fantasy's number 32 scoring receiver from that game forward. Kelvin Benjamin is back from a torn ACL, but Funchess is the heavy favorite to operate as the team's second starter at the position. The 6'4", 225-pound 22-year-old figures to be a boom-slash-bust fantasy asset, but his sky-high ceiling makes him the strong late-round Flyers. This may sound insane, but it's not inconceivable that Funchess will overtake Benjamin as the team's top receiver this season. Miss on Funchess. Travis Benjamin is worth a look as the new lid lifter in San Diego. Round 14 to 16 targets, high ceiling handcuffs and breakout candidates. We're assuming a 16-round draft here, so this is the point where league rules come into play. If you're drafting using the ESPN standard settings, you'll be forced to select both a defense and kicker. Fine. I'll cover my favorite targets at those spots later. However, if you're not, this is a spot where you can gain a leg up on your competition. Most of your league mates are going to select at least one kicker and defense and let them rot on their roster until week 1. Why? I have no idea. Don't be like your league mates. In lieu of those positions, gather up handcuffs at other positions, especially running back, and wait for injuries to strike during the preseason. If you have the Rams defense rostered and Ingram tears his ACL, you have the Rams defense. If you have Tim Hightower rostered and Ingram tears his ACL, you have a fringe RB1. Oh, and you can always drop 2 players and pick up a defense with a good matchup and a decent kicker just prior to week 1. By the way, if your league is hosted here at ESPN, why wouldn't it be? One way around the draft restrictions is to cut your kicker and defense after the draft, and pick up one of these high upside players. Now that my disclaimer is out of the way, here are the players you should be considering, as well as the round in which each player is currently being selected in ESPN 12-team leagues. Round 14, Devontae Booker, Will Fuller, Dorial Green-Beckham. Unlike a few other rookie backs we will discuss, Booker has very little competition for a massive role in the event of a C.J. Anderson injury. Fuller is running with the starters in Houston and figures to provide boom-slash-bust flex production if he plays a significant role. Green-Beckham is far from guaranteed an every down role, but if he earns a starting job, there's massive breakout potential here. Round 15, Sammy Coates, Philip Dorsett, Josh Doctson Coates is generating a ton of off-season hype, and rightfully so, with Martavis Bryant done for the year. Coates is the heavy favorite for the team's number 3 receiver gig and very well could blow by Marcus Sweet early this season. Dorsett will be on the field for most Colts passing plays as the team's number 3 receiver. Like Fuller, he's likely to be a boom-slash-bust producer, but could score 6 or 7 touchdowns as a field stretcher in a high-scoring, pass-heavy offense. Doctson won't play much early on, but is a Pierre Garçon or Deuceon Jackson injury away from WR3 status. Round 16, Jerick McKinnon, CJ Prosise, Jordan Howard. The 2015 season was a busy one for backup running backs, but Adrian Peterson held up for 16 games, which left McKinnon without a fair shot to emerge. He is some stand-alone value in PPR leagues and RB1 upside if 31-year-old Peterson misses time. A hamstring injury has hampered Prosise's off-season reps, but he's expected to handle passing down beauties in Seattle, and could do more if Thomas Rawls falters. Howard will be the hot at if when Jeremy Langford can't get the job done as lead back in Chicago this season. Undrafted, Nelson Agholor, Breshad Perriman, Jalen Strong, Dean Washington, Paul Perkins, Tim Hightower, Spencer Ware, Keith Marshall, Alex Collins, Ka'Deem Carey. As if we needed more proof that the league is as deep as ever with talent, check out this group of players currently going undrafted in ESPN leagues. It's shocking to see Agholor here, as he's both a starter and was a first-round pick last year. Perriman won't play much early, but it may not be long before he's pushing for an every-down role. He's the Ravens' best athlete at receiver. Washington, Perkins, Collins and Marshall are intriguing rookie backs on teams with a shaky situation at the position. Hightower and Ware are the next men up behind Ingram and Jamal Charles, respectively. Like Howard, Carey will be a candidate for big role if Langford struggles. Defense/special teams. Okay, so you have to pick a defense and kicker. Who are your best bets? Across the industry, I think the Bengals are underappreciated and make for a solid target. Here at ESPN, we have them ranked high, however, so they're being scooped up in the 10th round. The Raiders, Patriots and Vikings units are generally available in the final 2 or so rounds and should be on your radar if you're buying a long-term option. If you're streaming, usually the wise route get ahead of the competition by considering units with a light week 1 matchup. The Vikings vs. Titans, Rams vs. 49ers and Eagles vs. Browns are your best bets in that order among units available in the last few rounds. By the way, the rule of thumb is to spend your second to last draft pick on a defense and last on a kicker. But if you're in a league where you know that pretty much every other team is going to follow that strategy, beat your opponents to the punch and grab these positions around early. You'll have a leg up, and the same players you were considering in the 14th round will still be there in the 16th. Kicker. It's hard to get too excited about a kicker, but my favorite targets this year are Dan Bailey and Josh Brown. Bailey is the league's most accurate kicker since he entered the league in 2011, and the Dallas offense will be much better this season. He's going in the 12th round, however, so Brown is the cheaper late-round target. Brown's 93.1% field goal conversion rate is third best in the league over the past 2 years and serves as the cherry on top if you followed my roadmap and scooped up Manning as your quarterback.